president is getting ready to make a huge sales pitch to American lawmakers, but people all over the world will be listening.
After a bumpy first 5 weeks in office, Donald Trump will address a joint session of the US Congress for the very first time as he tries to sell his budget and policies. Aides say this time his tone will be more upbeat, less of the alarm and wrath that he's become known for. Jeff Zeleny looks at the sort of messages we might expect.
Some great people back here, some great people. And up here.
President Trump at the White House today with the nation's attorneys general before turning his focus tonight to Congress. It's the biggest moment of his new presidency, outlining his agenda during his first speech to a joint session of the House and Senate.
We're excited to welcome President Trump to the Capitol tonight, and we expect him to deliver a bold, optimistic message to the American people.
40 days after taking office, the primetime address offers Mr. Trump a moment to reset and reframe his presidency, which even he acknowledged was off to a rockier start than he hoped.
Thank you very much.
In terms of messaging, I would give myself a C or a C+.
Why?
In terms of achievement, I think I'd give myself an A. I don't think we've explained it well enough to the American public.
He gets that chance tonight and show how he intends to turn his campaign pledges into a governing reality. From health care to tax reform to national security. The president hopes to give Republicans a roadmap to pass his agenda. But divisions are already emerging in his party, and Democrats are vowing to resist.
Tonight, if passed as prologue, the president will use populist rhetoric in his speech, but he won't back it up with real actions.
As he prepares to sign a second version of his controversial travel ban this week, senior administration officials tell CNN the president is also eyeing an immigration bill he could discuss tonight. The president goes before the nation with a lower approval rating, 42%, than recent predecessors did during their first addresses to Congress. But he also has advantages, a 4.9% unemployment rate, and the stock market closing at a record high for nearly 2 weeks in a row. It's still an open question whether the ominous tones from his inaugural address.
This American carnage stops right here and stops right now.
Will give way to a more optimistic message, like on election night when he extended his hand.
To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people.
Democrats say Mr. Trump hasn't lived up to that pledge and are ready to resist. But leader Nancy Pelosi warned fellow Democrats to avoid any moments of disrespect, like when South Carolina Republican Joe Wilson shouted at President Obama.
The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally.
Pelosi told her members today, "We cannot be outclassed by Donald Trump. That would be the worst of all outcomes." And First Lady Melania Trump will be on hand for a rare appearance at the Capitol, surrounded by invited guests that speak to the president's agenda, including 3 relatives of Americans killed by undocumented immigrants. Jeff Zeleny, CNN, the Capitol.
Well, CNN political analyst John Avlon is the editor-in-chief of the Daily Beast, and he comes to us from New York. Great to have you as always.
Great to be with you guys.
John, we are hearing that tonight's speech is going to be optimistic, but when we look back at speeches President Trump has done, his inauguration address, some said, was the darkest Americans have ever seen. Can we expect tonight's speech to be a vision of hope?
Well, first, let's take them at their word, at least at the outset. I mean, the relentless spin from the White House is that this will be an optimistic, unifying vision. However, as you say, there are 2 problems with that. First of all, that was somewhat the same spin we got before the American Carnage inaugural, which fell far short of that goal. And second of all, it's also a matter of the policies. You know, whatever spin or bunting you put on policies, it doesn't change the reality of that impact. And for example, as Jeff Zeleny just pointed out, you know, the fact that, you know, some of the invited guests are going to be people whose family members were killed by undocumented immigrants, that itself sets a tone that isn't perhaps so uplifting and unifying as advertised.
Yeah, Trump obviously, as he always does, is going to be speaking to the public, but would you agree that his most important audience is in that room, and that is Republicans? There's plenty of fiscal hawks there who want entitlement reform, things like Social Security and Medicare, which he's promised to preserve. How much is he going to be using the speech, do you think, to win them over? He could have some road bumps with what he wants to do.
Absolutely. Look, there are two audiences for tonight's speech. And this speech, historically, the first speech a newly elected president gives to the nation is where the rubber meets the road in terms of campaign rhetoric meeting real policy that is at the heart of governing. And all policy, particularly fiscal policy, needs to go through the Congress. So while Republicans do have unified control of Congress, he's going to have to present a vision that resonates to folks watching at home, but also translates to action that Congress can take politically and philosophically. And as you point out, I mean, all the fiscal deficit hawks the Republican Party has traditionally rallied around, they are politically homeless in the era of Trump. And he's going to lay out a series of cuts which may warm some of their hearts, but it's not going to necessarily make a dent in the fundamental ledger. This is a speech where he has a chance to present a clear governing vision, but it's got to be rooted in policy. It can't simply be partisan rhetoric for it to be effective.
Right.
John, as we just saw in that last report by Jeff Zeleny, President Trump has given himself a rating on his performance so far as president in his first 40 days in office. He gave himself a C or a C+ for getting the message across. We haven't really seen that sort of humility before, have we?
It's probably our fault, though. It's probably our fault, though, John.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd rate it as humility, perhaps a degree of bracing honesty. But one of the oldest political tricks in the book is to say, you know, that you know, our hearts are pure, our content's great, we're just not getting the message out effectively. That was something that President Obama said even at the end of his two terms. So it's sort of a perennial complaint. But in doing so, he sort of sets the bar. I would suggest that part of the problem is, you know, he's outsourced a lot of his policy and a lot of his major speech writing to key aides, Stephen Miller and Stephen Bannon. And those two folks have a nationalist vision of America, which isn't characteristically optimistic, unifying, or uplifting. So part of the problem's got to be rooted with them. Ultimately, the buck stops with the president. But tonight's a night for him to try to transcend that baggage and to try to offer a reset that's rooted in policy reality. The importance of this speech in terms of how it translates to actually delivering on promises that can pass a majority of Congress really can't be overstated. He's going to have to find ways to reach out beyond his base. He has seemingly been unwilling to do so to date, but that's the only way ultimately to turn around poll numbers that are historic low at this point in a new presidency.
Yeah, and going back to, you know, the Republican side of it, I mean, this is still a president with the lowest approval ratings of any incoming president. When it comes to his Republican colleagues, the fiscal hawks don't agree with him on a lot of things. We're hearing now he might be softening on immigration and give legal status to some undocumented migrants who haven't committed a serious crime. That's also something anathema to a lot of some Republicans. Can you see a splitting off at some point? I mean, it's close in the Senate.
Well, I think, you know, look, every vote counts because it is close to the Senate, as you say. But what's interesting is that Republicans really have fallen in line behind this president, despite the fact he's underwater in terms of national popularity, because he's massively popular with the conservative base. The question is, you know, at what point does he alienate folks because of the policies he's pursuing? You know, if he indeed follows through on the trial balloon of offering amnesty for undocumented immigrants who, but not legal status, who haven't committed crimes, that's a classic Nixon and China move. That can be very effective in terms of reframing political debates and taking some of the angst out of some more polarizing proposals. But as you say, will he be applied the same standards that the far right has used to kill immigration proposals going back to at least George W. Bush? That'll be a test of his popularity among the base, but he's going to have to reach out beyond the base. And there are ways he can reshuffle the deck, particularly on infrastructure reform. But even that seems to be kicking the can down to 2018. That's something where the president has demonstrated expertise and could have broad bipartisan support if he follows through with specifics.